Communications technology has been very important in the field of distance education for many years. We look at the ways that we use communication technology both for the delivery of education as well as for the development of educational materials. Today, our topic is the application of communication technology in distance education. And we have a panel of experts who are going to be discussing a variety of questions in the next little while. With me this afternoon is Dr. Tony Bates from the Open Learning Agency, Dr. Chaiyong Brahmawong from the STOU, and Mr. Richard Simpson from the Commonwealth of Learning. Dr. Brahmawong, perhaps you could begin answering these questions. To what extent has distance education been driven by the advancements in information and communication technology?
In my belief, distance education can never manage without educational technology and communications. So it means that the existing infrastructure and the system that exists in each locality, each environment, will determine the type of distance learning system which an institution will have to design and make it happen. So I think the kind of communication technologies will determine the mode of delivery system for each institution.
So in your words, if the country has a highly developed communications infrastructure, then the distance education system can become more dependent or use technologies in more effective ways?
Certainly. In more advanced country with a lot of computer-based communication technology, they can make use of ISDN, hypermedia type of computer-assisted instruction. But in other countries, like in Thailand or other developing countries, they may make use more of the non-computer-based kind of technology, print-based or more traditional communications such as radio and televisions. Even broadcasting technology may not be available in many countries. So I would say that the existence of technology is actually the foundation for whatever the system that the country can apply to their distance education.
Dr. Bates, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I think that it's important to remember that print is a technology too. So virtually all modern distance education has been dependent on some form of technology or other. And even in the print field, technology is rapidly changing with the introduction of the electronic publishing and so on. So I'd agree with Chaiyong that it is essential to have a technology base for distance education, but we should be broad in our definition of technology rather than narrow.
My notes here suggest that often the application of information and communication technology lags behind the development of the technology. Richard, perhaps you'd like to comment on the measures that are necessary to bridge the gap between the rapid advancements in the technology and the application in education and training.
Well, I think that the gap that you're talking about between the development of the technology and its application in a particular field is not unique to the place of communications and information technology in the field of education. The whole question of technology diffusion is one that you can look at across a wide range of technologies. And for that matter, you can look at the problem of technology diffusion in the area of information technologies outside the field of education and come up with a very similar set of factors that at any one point in time prevent or inhibit the use of a technology in what theoretically would be its most effective way in a particular field. Now, there may be different specific circumstances depending on the technology, depending on the field, but they boil down to 2 or 3 areas that I think we come across in our work as the communications people or distance educators. The whole question of infrastructure and the development of technology itself and its availability is important, but It's less important than one might think because of many other factors, including economic or cost questions, but very much underrated as a consideration in the extension of technologies are institutional and cultural factors, which often inhibit the use of a technology in a particular field. I think in the field of distance education, just to pick up the point that was mentioned earlier about the importance of a given institutional and economic context for the use of technology in education, I think that's very true. It's extremely good point to make at the outset of our discussion. And I think that certainly has applied in the field of communication and information technology, in the field of education, because without the institutional and economic context, the technology will not itself be used very effectively. Essentially what I'm saying is that technology follows rather than leads.
Is it fair to say then that the factors that you just outlined are factors that would be seen to be issues for distance educators to address? Do we need to talk about those things?
Well, absolutely. And I think the most important issue when you look at the importance of an institutional context for the use of technology is the whole question of institutional reform and institutional change. And these are questions that are, I think, now in the forefront of the whole educational community, not just the distance educators, which themselves have been working quite effectively within their own field, but within the educational community as a whole. They're looking at the challenges they face and the need for those organizations to change and to use technology in a way that enhances that change.
I can't help keep thinking that you're talking a bit about the mindset of the institution. Tony, would you add to those comments that Richard's been making?
Well, I think the important thing that, probably the most important thing that distance education has done for education and training in general is to focus on the instructional process. What we've tended to see in traditional universities and colleges is a model of education which is a very old model and has served very well, but which doesn't really suit the new developments in technology. And until universities and colleges pay more attention and reward more the instructional process, then there's going to be a continual battle for distance educators to get the use of technology into colleges and universities for more flexible delivery. It's not just a question of a mindset, it's a question of the reward systems. In universities, certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world, you're rewarded not for your teaching abilities, but for your research abilities. And while that reward system is in place, it's going to be extremely difficult to get mainline educators to take technology seriously.
What would you see as some of the major issues and the problems in using information and communications technology in developing countries? Would they be similar to what Tony's been addressing or Richard's been talking about, or are there different issues?
I think in countries like Thailand, first, the commitment of the administrators. If they are committed and if they feel the importance of communication technology, and then they would do whatever means to bring them up to be applied to distance education. Second is the existing infrastructure, which in many countries they probably wait until the infrastructure exists. But in my belief or my personal view, I think we don't need to wait for that. For STUU, for example, we started this university 14 years ago without having anything. We did not have radio network by that time. We did not have television network by that time. But we helped them joining the project. I think the project that Tony was heading some 15 years ago, the so-called TV and radio project of Thailand for the World Bank loan, was later on implemented. And the first project was on radio program. And STUU and myself personally was sent by my president to join the project, and we gave them the demands, what kind of hours and program we need, and that justify the implementation of the World Bank loan for radio network. For television network, we had been trying very hard for 10 years, try to help the Department of Public Relations. That was different from the project you were trying to put it on. It was Channel 11 project. Now we could manage to have that network set up, but we still need the truly non-commercial network, and the government has just approved the project just in August 1992, after about 10 years, with 3 projects passing on to the government. So I believe that even infrastructure is the second burden for any country to apply distance education. But if we really believe in what we are going to do, I'm sure that we could manage to go through with that, starting from something we believe, and then resources, helps will come later on. The third important major issue which I think will come is the expertise of the personnel. We believe that having 10 very willing, highly motivated personnel may be better than 100 so and so kind of personnel. We need to have very devoted personnel to work on distance education, because we have to cope up not 1 to 10 students, but 1 to the matter of 10,000 students. This is the problem also. But once we train them, sometimes we just move away, especially in terms of technology. We have a lot of television technicians or engineers who, after being with us for some time, go to private firms for more pay. So I could think of 3 major issues now.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Tony, I know there's always been a discussion about technology driving distance education, or as Richard suggested, technology should be following the agenda for distance educators. I want you to comment a bit about the fact that, let me rephrase the question. Should available technology be the key consideration in designing distance education courses?
Well, it's not an either-or question.
Good.
The difficulty for most institutions is not to choose the technology, but to choose the focus and their priorities and where they want to go. The danger in many institutions is, because the technology is there, is to latch onto that and say, we'll use this as our delivery medium, without really saying, what is the purpose of the organization? Now, my view on that is that you've really got to start thinking very clearly about, why is this organization set up? How does it differ from the conventional institutions? What kinds of students are our priorities in terms of serving? And then look to see which technologies best enable you to meet those objectives. But often, without the technology being taken into account, you may narrow your focus too narrowly on what kind of students you can serve. So, for instance, if you have access to satellite, you may actually go outside the boundaries of your country. You could actually serve students in a region rather than in a country. So the very existence of the technology could influence what goals you have for the institution. And that's why I say it's an interactive process. You have to look at both. But technology without vision is a very dangerous way to go.
How would our colleagues then begin to make those decisions? Do we have checklists available? Do we have resources that they can use? Can we give them some support in making those decisions?
Well, there are academic models of media selection which I really wouldn't recommend, mainly because they're too, what I would call, minimalist in their approach, or reductionist. They take very tiny teaching decisions and work up to the technologies used. And when you're setting up a system, then you have to take a much bigger leap of faith and decide that you're going to use certain technologies because they seem to meet your needs best, and then make those work. But there are some checklists. You can use the actions model. Actions is an acronym that stands for access, Does it give us the access to the students that we want to get? Costs, what kind of cost ratios will there be for the numbers of students we're dealing with? Teaching functions, what kind of courses do we want to offer? For instance, if you want to offer science, you've really got to find a way of delivering experimental and research laboratory experiments. That would probably put you more towards television or computer simulations than if you weren't going to teach science. Interactivity, how do we provide interaction? Can the technologies available do that, or do we have to use other methods? O's for the organizational issues. Do we have those things in place? Do we have a radio network already in place, or do we have to build one? If you've got one in place, it's much more likely to be able to use it.
Richard, one of the roles of the Commonwealth of Learning, or perhaps one of the challenges, is the fact that many of the countries will be looking to you people to give them advice and to help them make decisions of this type. What do you see yourselves doing in helping countries make decisions of this in the area of communications technology?
Technology is too often, I'm sure we all know examples of this, the tail that wags the dog. And I think that in the Commonwealth of Learning, particularly in my role, responsible for communications technology, I have to continually guard against putting myself in the position that I see technology as somehow being a leading agent, as opposed to following what are well thought out system-wide definitions of priorities. In our case, of course, these are often made on a country level because we're an intergovernmental organization representing Commonwealth countries. But in working with individual educational institutions, we have to look for the same sort of decision-making that Tony was just outlining, one that's based on pedagogical concerns defined at a system-wide level. And that's very much what we try to do.
Do you see yourselves as helping countries create the infrastructure if there is no infrastructure in the country?
Well, in some instances, we would like to assist in that regard, but I think to go back to the issue of where developing countries, where the Commonwealth of Learning can perhaps respond to some of the particular concerns of developing countries. Although we talked about some of the internal factors that are very important in developing countries, things like cost, level of infrastructure, and so on, I think another area which is quite significant in terms of the needs of developing countries is in terms of the emphasis there, more so than elsewhere, on the value of international cooperation. And where the Commonwealth of Learning is placing considerable emphasis at the moment is to attempt to enhance the ability of countries to work together to cooperate in a number of areas, not only in technology. There are things like the exchange of educational materials that are not specifically related to technology that are quite important. But in the area of technology, there are areas, particularly in the development and use of telecommunications networking, where it's really very important for many developing countries, which tend to be small in a population sense as well as in terms of their economies, to work together to make use of some of the advances in telecommunications technology that we see developing around the world. And this means, in the final analysis, an attempt to aggregate demand for educational telecommunications in a way that takes advantage of the economies of scale that we know are inherent in those technologies. So that's some of the areas where the Commonwealth of Learning is attempting to have some strategic influence.
Richard, would you just say a bit more about the role of the Commonwealth of Learning in two areas? One is training of people to work in the area of telecommunications and information technology, and the other is how that might relate to some of the things that were said earlier in terms of issues for developing countries.
All right, well, one of the things that was mentioned earlier is the importance of infrastructure, and I think the emphasis was mainly on what you'd call hard infrastructure, hardware. What the level of development of telecommunications is in a country, or beyond that, the other elements of infrastructure, including such things as electrical systems and the availability of computer systems and software. But there is an important element to the use of educational technology which is often overlooked, not so much by the practitioners, but from people outside the distance education community, and that is the whole question of soft infrastructure, or training the human resources that are necessary to make distance education work. And there's a great deal of emphasis, of course, on training teachers these days, and the Commonwealth of Learning has put a great deal of, placed a great deal of resources behind that whole effort of training teachers, particularly teachers that make use of distance education techniques in one way or the other. Another area of our work is in the area of educational media training, which is, again, to equip people, both technicians and people that are actually involved in instruction themselves, in the ability to use broadcasting systems, radio and television to use in an open learning environment. So that's some of the efforts of the Commonwealth of Learning in the area of training. And just to get back to some of the other factors that are unique for developing countries in terms of the use of communications and information technologies. We talked about some of the internal factors that are quite important, the level of infrastructure that's available, economic considerations, availability of funding, and so on. But what's also quite important for developing countries, and particularly an area that has come to the attention of the Commonwealth of Learning, is the need, more so for developing countries than elsewhere, for more international cooperation, particularly because many of these countries are small, both in terms of population and in terms of their economic base. It's quite important that there are mechanisms in place that enhance the opportunity for collaboration among distance education institutions, and indeed among governments when they're involved. And that's one of the areas that the Commonwealth of Learning has attempted to promote in its short 4 or 5 year life so far. Such things as the exchange of educational materials, but in the area of technology, also the attempt to look at the use of telecommunications networks on a regional, transnational basis, which hopefully will take advantage of some of the economies of scale that we know are inherent in those networks, but are often not available to smaller countries and smaller distance education institutions.
That's a good point for us to move to the future. I think that many of the things that you've identified are obviously maybe part of the future for developing countries, but I'd like to turn us to talking about the future developments of communications technologies and how each of you feel about those developments, where that will place distance educators in the world today, and also where we may decide to move away from some communications technologies. I think there may be some things that we may decide to leave behind. Chaiyong, why don't you begin? Where's our future going to take us?
I think the advancement of communication technologies now start to make the world so small, in such a way that here you in Thailand, you could actually view BBC News every day, 24 hours. You could also share the same TV programs, your friends in India, in other countries around this area. You can see the same soap drama and that kind of things. And this is true for distance education. I'm sure that in the future, developing countries will have more access in terms of telecommunication. Let me categorize into 3 or 4 areas. First, in terms of traditional technology, I would think that print technology will remain for the years to come as the most economical form of media to be used in distance education. Radio and television broadcast may be limited in some form, but its twin forms, audio cassettes and videotape, may play a better role in this, especially audio cassettes. I myself find that if we could make the true use of it, they could even compensate television programs. And then moving to the more interactive situation, of course, I do not believe in face-to-face interaction, that is to be the best way of interaction. If we could manage to do some kind of programming so that our students could interact through media, that would be also very wonderful. In the future, I think conventional universities will also have to make use of distance education as an integral part of their teaching and learning, because through the existing even traditional media, and because of more work, more job for them to do, they would not feel so happy to come to listen to lectures in the four-wall room when they could actually retrieve from other means. Now, in terms of computer-based, country like Thailand is in the middle way, whereas other countries may take it a long time to go. But in advanced countries like in America, Canada, European countries, I think they may be able to make use of the so-called multimedia, hypermedia approach to make it as the core medium in distance education. Satellite and telecommunication, I would think, would be the most exciting venture to go in terms of influencing distance education. Now, my friends from the Philippines and from Indonesia could actually enroll at STU TV students, becoming STU students, and they could actually view TV program of STU via satellite. That's Indonesian's Paraba. And in 1934, we will have our own satellite, Thaicom, that will also cover many, many countries around this area. So I think telecommunication will play important roles in distance education. And nowadays, in certain part of Bangkok, people could manage to receive up to 20 channels, 5 of local TV networks, 4 or 5 from satellites, and about 6 from the so-called cableless, cable TV, making use of the so-called 2,500 megahertz ITFS broadcast, which they call in Thailand cable TV. So this is the new development that I think will influence distance education.
So many of the international partnerships that Richard was talking about, you believe are really could be an important component of the work that you might do?
It is. It's increasingly becoming very important. Commonwealth of Learning, Commonwealth Secretariat. We just had seminar roundtables in Penang recently, talking about the role of ComSec, Commonwealth Learning UNESCO, in terms of improving the quality of initial teacher education and in-service teacher education. So we are thinking about the collaboration, especially from international organizations.
Tony, what do you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, it's going to be exciting, that's for sure. It's going to be unpredictable. What I think will happen will depend on which pedagogical models come to dominate in distance education. What we're seeing is the emergence of 2 quite different pedagogical models in distance education. The one, I think, based on the British Open University and followed by STOU and the large autonomous institutions of curriculum-based design of multimedia materials. The second model is one that's very strong in the United States, and that is using technology to relay the classroom method from one site to multiple sites. And the technologies will vary depending on which model is going to be used. Now, I can only talk about developed countries here, but I'm sure the impact will also follow through to developing countries. If we take the first model, the multimedia model, then what I suspect will happen is that computing will become one of the computer will be the home of all the media. So you will get a multimedia environment created through a computer, including television, sound, and computer-based data and communications, all in the one box. And I'm pretty sure that will be here within 10 years. And that will be a tremendous challenge for curriculum designers, who will be able to have a very powerful piece of technology to help them teach in that model. But there will be high front-end costs, and it will depend on large numbers to make it cost effective. The second model of relaying classroom lectures, if that predominates, then video conferencing, probably over quite narrow bands like ISDN at 56 kilobits per second because of the low cost. I think that kind of technology will predominate. You could argue that the two will integrate. That's possible, but I think that the front-end model will be avoided by the second kind of people because they won't have the economies of scale to actually put the investment in that's needed to get good quality materials. So ironically, in a sense, we may see developing countries with their large numbers going down the first route and using computer instruction because the boxes will get very cheap. The boxes themselves will get very cheap. The cost will go in the design, but the cost of the design can be offset against very large numbers. So in a sense, there is a chance here for developing countries to leapfrog over perhaps at least the United States in the design of distance teaching materials. Now there's a controversial point for you.
I love it. I love it. Richard, you've spent most of your career in the whole area of telecommunications and communications. What do you think is going to change significantly enough for us to really take notice of?
Well, there's going to be all sorts of changes going on, and what makes it especially difficult is we're talking about changes across a very wide range of technologies, and at the same time, I think we're going to see a considerable change in non-technological areas as well. As I said before, I think there will be significant institutional changes which will go along with these developments and applications of technology. And I find Tony's analysis very interesting because I think there will be models of use of technologies that will be tested out at the same time these technologies are evolving. It will be interesting to see as technologies converge, and certainly telecommunications technologies that have been mentioned, whether it's satellite-based or fiber optics-based communications networks, and computer-based multimedia type of technologies like CD-ROM. These technologies are definitely converging, at least in a functional sense. They're already technologically convergent because they're all based on sophisticated use of computer digital technologies. It'll be interesting to see if, as these technologies converge, whether or not these models that are being used for distance learning themselves converge along with that technology. It'd be very interesting to track that. But it seems to me that that if I had to bet on one or other of those technologies, I think it would be very much toward, I believe you called it the front-end model, rather than the electronic classroom. If only because if you read what's being said by educational policymakers these days, they're actually talking about a redefinition of the classroom. And therefore, it seems to me to attach a piece of hardware onto a classroom and say we're going to use this now as a way of meeting the challenges of the 21st century could be have only short-term benefits, if any at all. I think the real benefit, the real contribution of modern communications technology will be in interactivity. Interactivity on the broadest range possible. Interactivity on a personal level with machine, in the case of computer-based systems. Interactivity in terms of human-to-human through modern telecommunications techniques. And that interactivity is going to mean two things, or perhaps it's one thing, but using different words. It's going to mean greater access to learning, and it's also going to mean empowerment of the learner. And I think if you empower the learner, that means something very significant in terms of institutional changes. And I think it goes back to this point about whether or not the electronic classroom is really viable in the long term, or whether we're talking about something entirely different than the conventional classroom of today.
That's a perfect note for us to end on. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been interesting for me. I've learned a lot. Obviously, you can see that the future in communications technology is not an easy one to predict. We know that the issue of partnerships is going to be critical to us. One of the more interesting things as well is what is going to drive the future. Are we going to change the definition of classroom and learning? And perhaps is the learner going to become the driving force in the work we do? Thank you.